Welcome to part 2 of our immigration videos. This one is about immigration and collective and individual rights. We'll see you inside. Welcome. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how the individual and collective rights of Canadians influence immigration laws and policies. We've already looked at what some of the requirements of immigration and refugee protection are. We've looked at some of the objectives of why we're doing immigration the way we do it in Canada and what some of our reasoning behind all of that is. Today, we're going to be taking a look at how those different policies and laws impact collective and individual rights here in Canada, which you already know about from studying chapters 3 and 4. Now, this is a graph that you can find in your book. This is pretty old, from 2006, top 5 first languages of immigrants and their knowledge of French and English. So this is just two interesting bits, right? We got immigration knowledge of French and English. Lots of people knew English, as you can see here. And then a few people knew French, a bunch knew neither, and then both French and English, 9%, which was higher than I expected, actually. But of the year, the top 5 first languages of immigrants, Mandarin coming from China, then English, Arabic, Punjabi, Spanish. This is an updated list. So it's the same graph, new list. Take a look. Mother tongue, Punjabi. This shows the population in thousands that say they speak this as their first language. What's interesting here, we noticed this actually a few years ago, is that Chinese is listed, Cantonese, and Mandarin. Now, Cantonese and Mandarin are two of the primary languages of China, and then some people said either I speak Cantonese or I speak Mandarin. Some people indicated on this, when this survey was done, some people just indicated I speak Chinese. So we could almost combine those numbers together in some case, I think. That's what I'm thinking. So in other words, the Chinese immigration is much, much higher than it appears on here because it's been split up. Anyway, you'll see that Punjabi is still the #1 by language and goes all the way down with a bunch of other languages. But we've got a very pluralistic society with lots of different people from lots of different places. So when you look at that graph, the question I have to ask for you is, why might the information in that graph and those bits of information connect to issues raised by immigration for Canada's official language groups? And when we look back at this, right, we're looking for official language groups. Let me see on this one. Am I finding any? Oh, look. English or French are not even listed on there. Okay. This is from 2011. English and French weren't even in that top. Okay. Now, that means when we're thinking about Canada's official language groups, what state are they expected to be in? Now, of course, this one doesn't mean that they don't speak English or French. This just means it's their mother tongue. So what we're doing is we're getting lots of immigrants coming from places that don't speak English or French as their first language. Most of these all would be able to speak either English or French as a second language or third or fourth or whatever. Okay? Not that they don't speak it, they just not their first language. So think about the issues for that. It's a good thing to maybe think about. That's a great kind of test question, a great essay question. How does that impact all these different immigrants from all these different places? How does it impact English and French here in Canada? Well, one thing as we're going through this and thinking about individual and collective rights is a thing called the Singh decision that came up. Now, here are the facts of the Singh decision. It was a case, a trial that happened based on this guy, Satnam Singh. He came to Canada from India seeking refugee status in 1976. The Immigration Act, though, in 1976 did not allow his case to be heard in person. He had to do it, just by paperwork and that kind of a thing. I was going to say online, but yeah, we didn't have online back then. It was all just paperwork, sending documents here and there and speaking through intermediaries and stuff like that. So he said then, once we got our charter in the 80s, and you got to think then, this is something that took a long time, right? He was trying to get immigration status in 76. The charter didn't come about until the early 80s, so he had to wait, good 6 years or so, at least. He said it was a violation of his Charter of Rights under Section 7. Section 7 is indicated right over here for you. Section 7. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. He said that he has that right. And furthermore, under Section 15, below here, every individual is equal before and under the law, and has right to equal protection and benefit of the law, etc. Supreme Court, when they heard this case, said that the word everyone, and here I'll underline it in red here, everyone means everyone physically in Canada. So if you're in Canada, the Charter applies to you. Now, we may have spoken about this. I can't remember if I said it in the video or not for the chapter, and I know I've said it in class, but everybody means everybody. So if you're in Canada, the Charter mostly applies to you. Yes, there's some rights you don't get, like your democratic rights, and there's some mobility rights that are restricted. But you get rights. If you're in Canada, you get rights. And the Supreme Court said that. So the result comes out, and we now can say that people that are trying to come here as a refugee have the right to an in-person hearing, because they, just like everybody has the right to kind of have their day in court, refugees would have that right as well. They can't be forced to have a lesser standing before the law simply because they're refugees. Immigration and Refugee Board has to be established to provide quick and fair hearings for these people, and the government has to provide the necessities of life during the hearing. So if you're coming as a refugee and you're here and you've got literally like nothing, maybe a bag of a few clothes, they can help put you up in a temporary place to live, give you some money for food. You're not going to be living well. You're not going to be driving a Lamborghini, but you'll have enough stuff to be able to live while your case is being heard until you can find out whether you can stay in Canada. Okay, that is something that the government will provide. Now, this whole thing, though, is rife with people's disagreements. And this activity right now that you can do on your own is probably one of the most important things you can do to study for tests in social studies, looking at multiple perspectives, that everybody's got a different idea whether this is good or bad. We talked a lot about the political spectrum earlier chapters. We haven't mentioned it in a while, but remember, not everybody agrees that immigration, the way we do it here in Canada, is a good thing. There are disagreements. There are people that think the way we do it is good and the way we do it is not good. So these are 5 different perspectives. What I'd like you to do watching the video is, you don't need to take notes on these, but what I would do is summarize A through E and realize which ones kind of think the same. Which ones would you group together? Which ones would you not group together? Are there any that stand alone? Are there any that stand out that don't fit into any others, that are kind of their own perspective? Or do they all kind of group together? Take a look, pause the video, take a look at the screen, and figure that out. So really the question comes, for all people that seek refugee status, should we give it to them? To what extent? This is a great question, again, for yourself to answer. How far do we go? Do we accept anybody that comes to our borders, or do we only accept certain people under certain conditions? What are those conditions? Who are the people? And if we're okay with letting everybody in, are we really okay with that? What if 7 million people showed up at our borders tomorrow? What would we do? Would you be okay with that? All those kinds of things. That's something for you to think about, and we explore that in some of these next slides as well in a different way, because what we have to realize is that allowing immigrants in also could be stepping on people's rights that are already here. And so one great way to think about this is through the Aboriginal perspective. And again, this is not all Aboriginals one way or the other, but this is a perspective that was brought up that needs your attention as well. Because Aboriginal peoples are partners in Canada and that they hold collective rights, which we talked about in Chapter 4, treaties made, between the government and these tribes as like separate sovereign identities, as basically like a separate country. These treaties exist. They have to share in prosperity. Some First Nations continue to face all kinds of issues like healthcare, education, employment challenges, poverty, things that are generations old. And we've learned how Canada has helped play a role in that. That these things aren't happening just because they're happening for a reason, and the policies and things that Canada has done in the past have led to those issues. So this creates a problem for Canada. If First Nations are to participate in Canada's economy in the right kind of way, they're not able to a lot. They're really having a hard time with that. So there's almost like a second class thing going on here, where we've got like all of Canada, and then we've got the Aboriginal populations that are suffering in some cases, many cases, and then we've got these immigrants. And so the question has come up, and the Assembly of First Nations gathered and addressed this in 2005 and created a resolution. Here's what they said. Here's what their solution was. Whereas Canada is known as one of the world's richest countries, true, yet fails to address the needs of First Nation communities, true. Whereas Canada fails to consult with the Assembly of First Nation leadership on immigration policies and legislation. Remember, if they're supposed to be partners, they're supposed to have consultations with each other about all kinds of laws and policies. We're supposed to ask First Nation people, how does this affect you? Do you like it? Do you not like it? And Canada continually runs into issues where we get in trouble because we did not do proper consultation with our First Nation partners across Canada. So here's their conclusion, the therefore. Therefore, be it resolved that the Assembly of First Nation call on the federal government to freeze all immigration coming to Canada until the federal government addresses, commits, and delivers resources to First Nations to improve the housing conditions, education, health, employment, First Nation communities. Think about maybe if you were in class what we talked about with the Attawapiskat issues. Think about tribes and on reserves that still don't have boiling water, don't have adequate schools, don't have decent electricity, things like that. Still, in 2023 here, their resolution was to just freeze all immigration. Do you think Canada followed that recommendation? No, they did not. But this was brought forth as a serious recommendation, because if we can fix the problem, why aren't we fixing it? And it's due for a good consideration, that question. That question's a very good question, and it's very gets really to the heart of what we're trying to do here in Canada in many ways. That leads us to the last section of the chapter, which we're going to look at in another video. We're going to take a look at how provinces influence all that this is going on. So that's going to leave us there for now. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.